Might check the invite.
Oh, sorry, yeah, if it's one that I sent, it works, if it's from Counselor Nishioka, it was an accidental.
Send issues. So we need to go back to your original.
So anyway, each one of these teams represents a lot.
He was
They're also certain.
and trying to like.
So everybody here.
There's a couple of like
Well,
catalysts.
and also Zoom team and state.
Versus like for housing or
Right.
whatever, like.
We don't have enough,
And that could work, and so.
but we don't have.
But
a quorum.
yesterday that.
Through activity, he ran into a.
Okay, he's trying now, he found another mic.
I'm really sorry about that confusion. I was just trying to.
I think what you did was fabulous, and I
Yeah,
learned
I
something.
meant I forgot to yesterday, I'm gonna send James. Cause he's in McMinnville now, he took over as their public works head or whatever.
So it's already live.
No, end of November beginning.
Of it.
We don't yet have a quorum and we're already live on
Okay.
YouTube.
Send him a note, 'cause I think he'll like.
I understand, but we still need at least one more. You're fine where you are. We need one more counselor
No, I'm
to have a
following.
quorum for today's legislative committee meeting.
We have 3 people.
Can you?
Hey, there you are. Welcome.
Hey, hi.
So we'll call the to order this meeting of the legislative committee for the city of Salem. I don't actually have a printed agenda. Sorry. So President Ahoy,
Counselor Phillips.
Counselor Nishioka.
there you go. And we are expecting Counselor Nordic perhaps at some point. So let's see, we'll just go right to updates and information sharing. Legislative session update, Justin Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Here we are for our update. As everybody knows, if you've been watching the news, you've been seeing what's going on. There's been a walkout by Senate Republicans. Definitely just grinding everything to a halt. They have said that they're not coming back until the last day of session, which doesn't make much sense. We all know the physical mechanics of getting out of the building take anywhere from 3 days to a week, right? So that's not really much of an offer. We've seen this as common practice the last, 3 or 4 legislative sessions. So that's unfortunate. That being said, I think we've done what we can in terms of getting everything into the hopper in ways and means. And as everybody knows, those priorities for us are sheltering services. We've made that request. We got about 9.3 million in there. NAV Center for operations, even though we've been told that might not happen in terms of operations, but with the revenue forecast, which I'll touch on here pretty quick, it's down there, it's in there. We're cautiously optimistic. Peace Plaza, we also put in for that. River Road mitigation, we think 2025, or we've been signaled by legislative leadership that 2025 might be the transportation session. So we will certainly look towards that. But regardless of that, that's in the hopper. It's where it needs to be. So hopefully something will come out of that. I just don't know because I haven't seen much between the chambers. And, you know, you guys maybe I've said this to this group, really miss the Senate president being there just because of his history and his knowledge of the building, but even more so really miss Jackie Winters, who was one of our senators who had a level of decorum and a level of respect for the process that when her and Peter were in there, things like this didn't happen. So unfortunately, we've got new folks in there, we've got new faces, but hopefully somebody can come and sit at the table, because I think we all know, regardless of your ideology, there are a lot of things here that benefit a lot of Oregonians. So I'm hopeful at the end of the day, a couple senators come back. They don't need to vote on difficult things that they have ideological disagreements with the other chamber and the other side of the aisle, but hopefully somebody comes to their senses and comes back to the table, because we're talking about millions and millions of dollars that help their constituents and help all of our state. So again, this is your minor league influence peddler at the end of the legislative session, being optimistic, but I hope that something will work out, because, the folks from the city of Salem would really benefit from the proposals and priorities that we have. So I'm cautiously optimistic.
But Justin, in
Yeah.
terms of things that aren't our priorities, like just policy bills, we can just assume that any policy bill that hasn't passed is dead.
Correct. I mean, we were able to get photo radar done early in the session. Looking at abandoned RVs and some of the other things that might complement some of the things that we're trying to do in terms of funding and homelessness and trying to keep our city clean. I mean, I'm not as hopeful as that. Obviously, we need to pass budgets. The legislature itself as a body has passed a continuing resolution that goes till September. I think it's the second week of September, September 15th or so. So we know a budget's got to be done constitutionally. At what point they come back or what format that is, I just don't know. But I think in terms of those policy issues, anything that hasn't been done right now or anything that doesn't just keep queued up if they come back, I think would be a long shot, Mr. Mayor. I think you're correct. Thank you. Yeah, target signing day, as everybody knew, was June 15th. The constitutional signing day was June 25th, so there still is a little bit of time for something to happen. Everybody probably saw the forecast. There's about $2 billion more than were expected in the 23-25 biennium, which bodes well in one sense, but even if the legislature was running like normal, I almost think it's more difficult. And as a former legislator, it's almost more difficult when there's too much money, right? Because then you have to really make decisions about who gets what, where, and how we're going to do this. Versus as a legislator being able to say, I'm sorry, we're making cuts in budgets right now. We really can't look at that. We'll get to that down the line. So that's good news. Governor Kotek, as everybody knows, is continuing to look at investments in housing, behavioral health, education. That's really her focus this session. We'll see that transfer to something in that second half of her administration. Rayfield's focusing on keeping budgets at current service levels, as well as housing, healthcare, jobs, and education. The other notes from that: employment's high, income's up, business tax is up as inflation continues to spike prices. We've got a slowing population growth, but recession is still a risk, and so I think we have to keep eyes and ears on that and what's going to happen. Legislative priorities. Again, I touched on all four of those. Policy, we talked about photo radar, abandoned RVs. I mean, I think that's a 2-session deal. A lot of questions from legislators in those hearings. But again, I think that's something we can work on in the interim and make sure that happens. I talked about ODOT, and I talked about priorities in transportation next session. And then finally, Mr. Mayor and members of the committee, I'd just like to say, this city's done a wonderful job, not just this council, but prior councils, in working on their relationships with the tribes. And as everybody knows, I represent Grand Ronde. Catherine Harrison passed away this week. What a wonderful woman, what a wonderful life, and what an amazing leader. And I think everybody here can be proud of the MOUs that we've signed, not just with Grand Ronde, but Celeste, that really says, hey, we as a city, we as a government respect tribal governments, and the work we've done, I think, is really good. So I wanted to make an announcement, let everybody know her service will be June 4th, which is a Sunday from 10 to 3 over at Grand Ronde. If anybody has the time and wants to stop by, it would be great. But what an amazing woman. I was honored to be able to work with her. And again, I think the city can be proud of the work that they've done with Grand Ronde as well. So thank you, Mr. Mayor, for indulging me in that. And
Thank you for mentioning that, Justin. It's really important. And if you read her history and the things that, I mean, the tribe would not be where it is today without her. I mean, it's just that simple. And it's really remarkable.
And Cheryl Kennedy, the current tribal chairwoman, is, just in the shadow of Catherine, and to have such strong women leaders, within those governments, it's just, I've really been blessed. We as a city have been blessed by the relationship that we have, both with Grand Ronde and Celeste. You see it in Dee Pixley as well. So it's just great. So again, kudos to this council, prior administrations, and kudos to the city for working with their tribal partners and tribal governments.
Thank you, Justin. I know, do we have anything you want to talk about with priority bills?
Well, we are prepared as staff to give you a quick update on all of the things that are still floating around, and with the context that we don't know what will really happen with them. We have spent quite a bit of time together talking through the housing related bills and the focus of this session. And then we also have a quick update on enterprise zone and other incentive bills. These are things where what we've seen this session is things are sort of morphing into these omnibus bills, and we're still tracking them. So if you don't mind, we could.
Sure, no, that'd be great. I was also hoping you would just mention briefly for the group's sake, I don't know if our counselors know about the federal lobbyist that we've retained, and just if you could mention that at some point before we end.
Perfect. I feel like I've been talking about that so much, but I think.
I know, but I think that sometimes they don't get the benefit.
I
of
will.
that.
Jessica, would you like to lead us off on housing, and then Eunice, if you have anything to add?
Definitely. So as far as our bills that we were tracking, we have 3 that are still stuck. Senate Bill 611 and House Bill 3042 are on the Senate floor. And then House Bill 2761 never ended up anywhere. So it's kind of like floating in outer space right now. We don't know where if it'll get back on track. Well, we know it's not going to get back on track. So hopefully that one will come back next year. So the only thing really was the policy and the funding package related to House Bill 2001 and House Bill 5019. One neat thing is that with Nicole's advocacy being the president of the Housing Authority of Oregon, we asked that the housing authorities have a voice for the Housing Production Advisory Council. And so we have been identified to participate on the workforce shortages group. And then we also have another subject matter expert in the room who will be participating in a different way. So we're excited to still continue the conversation of production from now to the end of the year with the bills that are talking through that 36,000 units and how we're going to get there, both affordable and market rate. So that's kind of where we're at as far as housing is concerned, still tracking, but everything's stuck.
Eunice, anything to add on housing?
Sure. So I'm going to be serving on the, as a subject matter expert on the codes and design. So it's like the land use side of that. So we'll be tracking that in the next few weeks. Actually, I think it's a month or so. We're also tracking several housing bills that are still stuck, including the governor's bill that would create a housing production and accountability office, and as well as would change the way we can approve or not approve variances and adjustments. So there's been legislators that have been meeting behind the scenes to try to kind of work out a compromise on that, meeting with home builders, cities, affordable housing developers. We learned that there might be a hearing on it. It's in House rules next week. So if that happens, we'll be watching and we'll give an update.
Senator Patterson mentioned in our meeting with her this morning that the Senate Housing Committee continues to have information hearings every Wednesday and encouraged us to be monitoring those. So you might watch for those in Senate Housing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any questions about the housing stuff? Any questions? Okay, so then Sarah, would you lead us through the omnibus economic development incentive stuff?
Sure. So I think I gave an update on sort of the various incentive packages and tools as it tied to the semiconductor bill, Senate Bill 4, which did go through. The goal of the Economic Development Committee was they had sort of this whole list of all the different incentive programs, and they kind of packaged everything together and said, okay, we're going to hand this off for, and I think it went to House Revenue to sort of say, start looking at these, find the funding, package those up, and then we'll sort of have this, more complete instead of these individual bills that have been floating. It kind of didn't happen that way. There's still technically 9 enterprise zone bills that are alive. It does feel like the focus is really right now on 2 of them. However, the first one, which was House Bill 2199, which was a straight just extend the sunset. So technically the program ends in 2025. And the hope was to extend it to 2035. And when it got to revenue, it turned into a gut and stuff. So now there's a whole bunch of new requirements tied to enterprise zones. Different types of businesses can't use them after so many, I think for us being in an urban, after like starting year 3, I want to say businesses have to start paying the tax associated with the school districts. Anyone that has them has to do some additional trainings. There's a whole lot of stuff that just got added in. There was a public hearing now at the Joint Tax Expenditures Committee, and the co-chairs of the ECDEV committee are not happy. They did testify on why did this happen. They've now put an amendment forward to revert it back to what it was initially. so that one's a little messy. And then there's Senate Bill 1084 that has sort of come through and become a little bit more mainstream, I would say, in the last couple of weeks, and I think mostly probably because of what's happening with 2199. And 1084 is an attempt to sort of take 4 or 5 different programs and put them into one bill. So it includes extending enterprise zones, industrial site readiness, research and development tax credits, gain share, and there might be one other program in there. It's moving, but it hasn't really had a public hearing. So it's moving to also the Joint Tax Expenditures Committee. It was in revenue as well, and they basically said, we're not even going to really have a hearing on this. We just want to move it to the joint committee, and then we'll have a hearing about it at that point. It's differently worded than the other bills that are out there. So once again, there's still no consistency. There is a House bill that's similar to 1084 that tried to package everything together, which has gotten no movement. So I have no clue what's going to happen. I have a call on Tuesday. So I'm hoping during that call with the other communities and our ECDev professionals, we'll get some more insight as to what's going on behind the scenes. But it does sound like there's kind of a lot of anger amongst people that sat through all of these semiconductor hearings. I mean, I think they said we had over 80 some hours of public testimony. And so I think that committee feels a little slighted that now as their bills are moving forward and they have evidence that we need these programs and they back up all this other stuff that other committees are kind of trying to gut and stuff on them.
Well, the good news is none of those bills are gonna pass.
We're at this point now, so that should be really interesting.
They're all dead.
So that's happening. There is an opportunity zone disconnect bill. It floats every session, and really what it is for projects within the designated opportunity zones, the federal tax abatement would still remain, but what it is to disconnect so that those who invest would not get the abatement from the Oregon tax side. It was pretty quiet. It's recently had a little bit of movement, but I would be very surprised if it goes anywhere. It's kind of counterintuitive to everything that's going on. And I'm not getting a lot of buzz on it, which makes me think behind the scenes, there's conversations that it's maybe just getting moved out of courtesy. So we'll keep tracking that one though and see what happens. And then there's one oddity bill, I guess I would throw out there. It's House Bill 3410. And it's just a study bill. And we've had a lot of these throughout the session. They're usually placeholders, but it's moving as a placeholder. And it still is just a study, which makes me wonder what they're going to put in there. So I'm watching it to see what happens, because obviously it's not just going to be a study on economic development. It's a little too broad for it to be getting a work session and things like that and moving to different committees. So it's obviously a placeholder for something. I'm just not sure what yet.
What's it relating to?
It's literally a study of economic development, which historically is what they use, and then they swap them out. But it's odd that it's now getting movement. So I'm not sure. And maybe I'll learn more next week. But so we still have a lot of stuff out there. Really, none of our stuff has passed that we wanted. But hopefully it'll be part of the larger, since it would be part of the budget bill because it's all funding related. We're hopeful that we'll still see something on it.
Thanks, Sarah. Any questions on the economic development? Okay. Does anyone have any other questions about all legislative stuff before I slip into the federal? No? Okay. Okay, so we, the city, have hired a federal lobbyist. We had a really competitive RFP, and we got, I think there were 4 candidates that we brought in for interviews. So we had a fabulous, I mean, you want that when you have to make this kind of a really fundamental choice for the future of the city. And so we selected Summit Strategies, and so that'll be Mark Dedrick and Terry Hubert. If you ever see any email from me or an invitation with their names in it, that's who you'd be meeting with, is Summit Strategies. They're coming into town June 14 and 15, and they're going to be touring some of the bigger asks we have lined up for future federal grant opportunities and congressionally directed spending requests or community project funding. One place we're going to make sure to visit is the airport, because that's right now we have 2 active requests, and that will really be helpful for they want to geek out. It'll be helpful for their awareness and understanding of these projects. I also want just staff and council members to know that we are bringing into our fold parks and transportation. We've been relying, Public Works is so vast and our focus has been on water for so long. We're shifting our focus and expanding so that we have more technical expertise in those two fields to help us with our federal side. And also as we're heading into the transportation session, we'll be ready with that too. So I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to make sure.
I would just like to mention that I think one of the really cool features of Summit is that they are a Washington DC lobbying firm, but yet our lobbyist is from Silverton. And he got married here in Salem, and so they have strong roots to our community. They know our community already. It's not an academic thing for them. And so I think that's a really great feature.
And it also is great because they can visit family when they come.
Exactly.
So-
Trips here. So I think
And we have a Portland-based person with the
Yes.
firm too. So
Yeah.
if we have an emergent issue, we can draw on that person's expertise to come down and help us out. And just, I think our intent in bringing back so we've been relying on relationships with local offices for a while to further our projects. And Miguel Crest is a perfect example. We were successful, I think, that 6th time.
I lost count before.
So we finally achieved full funding of McGill-Crest, and so that's great. But we think we have a lot more opportunity that we haven't been able to take advantage of just because we haven't been positioning ourselves in that way. And already, in my opinion, the contract is paid off because we had a pretty quick and dirty conversation about which way to go on EV charging, and we made a good decision about what's just going to be most competitive. And then we have another opportunity on the Safe Routes for All. I'm going to get my language locally and federally mixed up, but definitely Safer Routes, something. There's a great grant opportunity, and staff are thinking about what's the best to pitch, but we can also rely on their embedded expertise about what would be more successful. So we're doing things, in my opinion, already less blindly than we have been in the past. And then there's a lot more opportunity as things go. So the things we're going to be looking at when they're here, we're going out to Guerin Island because we have a bridge replacement to get to the island and provide water to everyone in our community and others. And so it's a really critical bridge. And so we're going to go out and look at that as well as the rest of the treatment plant. We're going to be looking at River Road slide mitigation as a potential federal opportunity, looking at Front Street as maybe some help with the rail issues there. And we're looking at some parks opportunities and the airport. And so that's our current tour schedule. So Trevin, for you guys, as you guys are pitching different COPS grants and things like that, we might want to think about how we can use them to help us with all of that. And I think
in
we
a
have
pre-application way, they can help inform us on like what are the best opportunities, not just in terms of advocating for getting the grant, but like actually helping us pick and choose where we spend our energy.
And just like with Justin, if we have an active grant, I mean, we've been pretty decentralized in how we've been pitching these opportunities, but it would really benefit me and Summit Strategies to be aware of active grants that we have so that they can answer questions for us as they're asked and moving around.
And we do have our strategy with them is that we have a single point of contact with the city. So everything actually needs to funnel through Courtney to get to them initially. And I'm sure the conversations will take place after that, but we really want to not be inundating them from every corner of the city. We want to funnel that through a single point of contact.
So the visit is the kickoff, but then we're going to be having them participate just like this in some conversations with us as we move into developing our federal agenda and our priorities and all of that too.
I'm really excited because I first worked with Summit Strategies when I represented the Newburgh Dundee bypass project. We were able to go in and get 192 million for that project. As we look in the future, as Courtney mentioned, River Road, as well as some other transportation projects, they really bring a nice expertise to the table on that. And being able to coordinate with our federal folks will really be helpful.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this. I think it's long overdue and really a good thing for us. So.
And it's already been great. So, and I think we've been at it 2 weeks. Wow, it's already been great.
Great. Do we have anything else on the agenda or?
We
other
do not,
items?
but we have a tentative meeting date that would be on your calendars for June 8th. And so just, I think, is that right? Nine's Friday. So just want you to be aware that that's on your calendars, and depending on what happens in the next whatever, you might see that disappear. But we will continue to keep you, advised, and then generally what we do to finish out a session is we get a wonderful report on all of your priority bills and where they stood at the end of session. And we use that as staff to build positions, because everything comes back, right? Everything that's old is new again. So we use that to help us build your legislative agenda for the coming session.
Counselor Phillips?
Yeah, thank you, everybody, for the updates and presentations. I knew that today was, I had the sense it was going to be mixed. Having more funding at the state level is always the potential for good news, but with the walkouts happening and hearing that, all policy things are likely dead and we can just focus on a budget is not good news, in my opinion. I guess my question, in addition to tracking how bills did this cycle, what can we learn from this new normal of walkouts every single session? Like what is the takeaway from that? I don't expect to know it now, but what can we do as a city is there anything? I mean, right now I get the sense that we're kind of supposed to keep level heads and just hope the process works itself out. But I don't know if there's any thoughts for my fellow electeds, what's constructive and not constructive.
Do you want to give that a shot?
Yeah, I'd say this. I mean, obviously it's disappointing. We're cautiously optimistic, but I think a couple things are going to need to happen. One, the number that I saw, and again, everybody probably saw in the paper, was, 2/3 of every county voted for this proposal that said 10 unexcused absences, you shouldn't be allowed to run for re-election. So there's strong public sentiment to make something happen out of this. And whether that didn't happen or not, I think you will see an approach to that by the government somehow, some way. But I think we have to wait until whatever court case is filed, because we will see what comes out of that. Again, I think you've got that side of the aisle really thinking that will be a saving grace, and it might be. But again, when you're dealing with 2/3 of the electorate wanting something, I think politically something's going to have to be done. So I'm a little more optimistic in the future that something will get done, whether that comes out of a court decision or a precedent from the court. I think we'll have to find that blend of what the constituents want versus what's actually legal. So I think we'll just have to kind of stay tuned.
Okay. My other comments are maybe a little more in the weeds, or I don't know when the right time to bring them up. It's sort of new business. One is I'm not sure this is the right body for it. I serve on SCATS, and SCATS is going to change its makeup of the policy committee because of the census update. That we're adding Almsville because their population is such that they have to be added. But now in the next several months will be the time to look at how we distribute votes. And it would be my preference that there's an official stance from the city. I don't know if it should come from this committee or from council at large, but I think we should look at that. Staff mentioned that they will probably start the process of presenting data, like showing how other communities do their MPO. I mean, I brought it up. I have some support from my fellow members on that body. There's going to be some pushback. And I think a majority of people on that, may not want Salem or other entities to have additional votes. But, my goal would be to be a bit more proportional, not just, Salem gets one vote, Almsville gets one vote. It would be more kind of tied to population. So I guess my question is this the place to bring it up?
Thank you, Counselor, for the question. I think that's something that we can discuss maybe offline, and this group we might bring it back to this group for recommendation to council, but I do think it's something we want to get the council's voice behind so we can advocate for our best position. But let's meet offline, maybe with the city manager and other key staff, and have a chat about it.
Okay, sounds good. And then I have another question that may not be the purview of this committee or not. It's a federal thing, so I think it's great news that we're getting a federal lobbyist. This is not so much a lobby thing, but I think it's pretty new, but the Supreme Court just settled a case on the Clean Water Act that, massively changes, wetlands are no longer considered part of waterways. And I think that may have some unintended consequences for a lot of commercial and city entities. So what is the point where, we as council could kind of get an understanding of, what that might lead to? Because it's a big deal.
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent point and question. Maybe we could just ask staff to put together, just a briefing for us on what are the implications of this decision for the city. I think that's a really, really good thing to be looking at. And so, what do you think, Mr. City Manager?
Are you imagining it might be something that would illustrate where we may be in conflict or where we may choose to establish a policy that is more far-reaching?
Well, I don't know, because I don't know
It's
what the
pretty
ruling
devastating.
means, so I want to
I
understand.
think we just need to know what the ruling means, and that's good work for Dan. I suspect it doesn't mean as much as you might think for Salem and the state of Oregon, because I don't think our regulatory framework necessarily relies on EPA guidance for establishing wetlands, but more to come on that.
Yeah, so you'll put together
Yeah.
something for us,
Yeah,
to- and then we can,
Dan can at least do an evaluation,
great,
start with that.
and then we can decide what our path forward is after that. Great.
And then the last thing is probably minor, and you'll probably learn it, already know it. I met with Karina Perez Europa. She's replacing Fritz in Senator Wyden's office as the Marion County point of contact. I think she's hoping to meet with many of the counselors moving forward, just as to kind of get to know you, if any issues pop up that Senator Wyden's office can help with. I've worked with her before. She's a great person. I think we'll all miss Fritz, but I think Karina's going to do a good job. And I think it's timely that we've now got federal lobbyists, and we've got Summit working on our behalf. And I told her that something to that effect was coming. So just if people don't know that change has happened, I wanted to put that plug in.
Thank you, Counselor.
Okay.
Anything else?
No, I mean, I'm still hopeful that maybe in some big bill, we'll get some more funding for either the navigation center or something, based on the fact that the revenues are $2 billion more than they forecast initially, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
Yep, we are in a wait and see mode for sure. Counselor Nishioka, did you have anything? Staff, anybody? All right, thanks, everybody. We're adjourned.
Bye.